Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my author backlist video for Geraldine Brooks. So I engage in author backlist reading usually in December for the past few years, where I take a look at a contemporary author and I wrap up my reading of their backlist, usually in fiction. And so with Geraldine Brooks, some years ago, I read her novel, The Secret Chord, close to when it was published. It is a novel that dramatizes the life of King David in the Iron Age. And then earlier this year, I read her most recent novel, Horse, and then also her other very Jewish novel, People of the Book. And I'll put a caveat in here that Horse is a story about a real-life antebellum racing horse that was very famous. And People of the Book creates an imagined history for a real-life medieval manuscript called the Sarajevo Haggadah, which is a medieval Jewish manuscript, illuminated manuscript, from Barcelona, in fact, is where it was made. The Haggadah is the order of the Seder, and it is a book that Jews use during Passover. And so that left me with having three of her fiction books that I had not yet read, and I decided to wrap it on up in December, and that's what I did. And now I'm here to summarize my thoughts on those books. But before I get into that, here is a brief biography of Geraldine Brooks. She was born in 1955 in Australia and now lives in the United States. She is a journalist and has also written nonfiction books, and when it comes to her fiction, all of it is historical fiction. Okay, so let's get into these three books I read in December. I'm going to talk about them in the order that I read them. And I, in fact, started with Brooks's debut novel, Year of Wonders. So this fictionalizes a account of the plague in medieval England. And a real-life instance of a village that contracted the plague. It came to them probably through a shipment from London, and they decided, very much bolstered by their pastor, to basically quarantine themselves off rather than spread the plague to others, and that's something that many of the townspeople in fact did. So Brooks goes ahead and writes a story for this year of life, a very harrowing and tragic year in this village where the majority of the inhabitants die of plague, but they are ministered to by this pastor and his wife, and then the main character of this novel, who is a widowed young woman named Anna Frith, who loses her two children to the plague. It's interesting to view this novel through the lens of Geraldine Brooks's career as a war correspondent, and maybe this is something where I shouldn't have, gone online to, research what other people thought of the book, because it changed my lens, I guess. It shifted it to look at it through that lens about how, harrowing conditions can be in the real world. And, this book was written pre-COVID, so we weren't necessarily, I guess, at the time in the mindset of like mass pandemics and quarantines and how they work. And this sort of mass tragedy is usually something that we would see more in war-torn areas. So I think a lot of people in their reviews would talk about trauma through that lens and the trauma that the characters in this book faced. I wouldn't call this misery porn, though. I feel like overall it's really impressive what Geraldine Brooks was able to do with a story that in a way had a foregone conclusion. We knew there'd be a lot of people who would die in this book. And maybe part of the reason she got around it is that she used a little bit of a framing device. So, it's no question that Anna survives because she starts telling the story at the end when she's gotten through it. And maybe by reminding us that she's the main character, it becomes a bit about her own fortitude and what she learns about the human condition and the spirit and what she's able to bring to other people. And I think there's a lot in here about the positive aspects of faith and religion and staying, true to this greater mission for the goodness of mankind. But this is also a book that does, drift into negative human behaviors, and maybe we're more sympathetic to them to a degree as the death toll is rising. So we do see like an example like of a witch hunt and a trial, like a very contained mini one that's then squelched. And Anna's father is a very antagonistic character. And I think some reviews thought that it went a little too far, like in sort of this melodramatic, antagonism of witch hunts and what Anna's father does, which includes robbing the dead. Those didn't necessarily bother me as much, but I do feel that the very end of the book got a bit overdramatic. I feel like the pastor had a bit of an abrupt about face, and where Anna ended up at the end of the book is something that I don't think is in keeping with most historical figures of the time. So that kind of, took me out of the story, and it's weird, especially at the end, to have that sort of like iffy taste in your mouth. But during the reading, especially of the middle of the novel, there was a lot of emphasis on fortitude and faith, and also just the strength of a character who just sets out to do good deeds. The second book I've read is March, which is actually Geraldine Brooks's Pulitzer Prize winner. So automatically, when I think about the things I didn't like about this book so much, I wonder how wrong I am. But overall, I really did like it, but I do have some mixed feelings. This is an interesting thing to call, a historical fiction. Most of Brooks's historical fiction is based on stories rooted in fact. But this one's a little more mixed because it's Little Women fan fiction is basically what I was calling it, because it imagines the life of Mr. March from Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. But that character was in fact very much based on Louisa May Alcott's father, and Brooks talks in the book, in the afterword, about how she used that real history as some inspiration for the character. And I also think it led to some more like complications and nuances of character that Little Women, the novel, didn't necessarily deal with, because it's a bit of a moralizing novel in the way that March isn't. In fact, I think March might be a little bit of a challenge to Little Women about how easy it is to be moralizing or how uneasy it is in this war-torn situation. Because Mr. March spent a lot of the action of Little Women off screen because he was a chaplain in the Civil War. And this explains how he joined up for idealistic reasons. He was a staunch abolitionist, and he went to, free the slaves. And he was hoping to go with his congregation, his flock, with people who had very similar beliefs to him, but he wasn't able to. He went with infantrymen who were part of a mill town and were far less interested in, the high reasons for why the Civil War was being fought. And they were, you might say, of a lower moral character in the ways that they treated people in the South, black and white alike. And from the very beginning, Mr. March is facing all sorts of troubles, including nearly drowning when he is fording his way to Virginia, and that leads to the death of another soldier. And so from the off, he's, in a sense of existential crisis about who he is as a person. And then there's things he witnesses as he goes along his journeying, and then he has to realize that first of all, his idea of who he is as a chaplain is very different than how everyone else in his regiment views him. Like, he thinks like he's there for moral instruction, and they think he's there basically to, bolster their spirits. And I think Brooks just has a wonderful way with dialogue so that everyone sounds really authentic. It's not like, everyone that March talks to is just some evil devil or anything. I mean, they're perspectives on who they are and what they're doing and what they're facing through the Civil War, which was so harrowing, comes off as legitimately human and something that March has to even learn from a little bit, even if his own ideals aren't necessarily wrong. So part of the novel in Virginia is about him in this plantation that's been converted into a field house, where actually he has some past history, and then Geraldine Brooks jumps back way into the past when he was a itinerant merchant selling his wares, and he actually was a guest at this plantation for a little while, and part of his abolitionist spirit comes from shame about indulging in that planter lifestyle for a little bit. And so first he's there, and then he's moved to another plantation that's been commandeered by the Union to reinvigorate the cotton trade and try to make a little money, and also try to teach the former black slaves how to be productive members of society, which is a weird way to put it, especially when they're doing what they had been doing before. But technically they're supposed to get paid for it this time, although the money is very slow coming. And again, March has to contend with the fact that the conditions on this plantation are not ideal for his aspirations, and that it's just complicated by the facts of war, and that they are harried at all sides by Southern sympathizers, and the only reason they're really able to exist at all is because of the Northern garrison, which is ultimately removed, and that's when Southern sympathizers are able to, swarm the plantation, and that's in fact when March gets hurt, and we get to see that story play out. And then he gets to the hospital in Washington, and the narrative shifts to Marmee, to his wife, and I do feel like it didn't work as well for me getting her perspective on things, especially because it dipped into the storyline I had the most trouble with, where, back in the past, Mr. March had a dalliance with a slave woman when he was at the plantation as a peddler. And I just felt like it wasn't very well developed, and that it took away from the main message about who Mr. March was, having to challenge his idealism in Civil War. And the love affair / love triangle felt kind of cheap next to that. So yeah, those are my general thoughts. And again, I think the strengths of this book are about how people confront these really harrowing times where there's no easy answers. And the final book I have to talk about may be my favorite of the three, though perhaps I'm contrarian for saying it. It is Caleb's Crossing, which is Brooks's attempt to dramatize the life of the first indigenous person to have graduated from Harvard in the 17th century. And really the most controversial thing I would say about this novel is that it's not really about that at all, or not directly about that. She doesn't tell the story from Caleb's perspective. She tells it from the perspective of the daughter of a minister who actually takes Caleb in and sort of, Christianizes him and sets him on the path to attend Harvard. And really, it is more the story of this character, whose name is Bethia. And also, I should say that it's very little about Bethia's or Caleb's time at Harvard. It is about their time in a preparatory school that's supposed to, prepare young men for Harvard. And Bethia is there, in fact, as an indentured servant to pay for her brother's education. And Caleb is there as a promising Indian student, along with another Indian young man who grew up in Bethia's household. And maybe one of the most fascinating things about this story, most centrally maybe with this story, is that Bethia has very different religious opinions and cultural opinions than I do, but I could still find her relatable as she tries to make her way through the world, and that she has a true love of a home and family, The setting is really visceral. She grows up on what is now Martha's Island. It's an idyllic island at the time, whereas Cambridge is very polluted and it seems like very badly architecturally designed for good health for everyone who lives there. But it provides Bethia with something she really seeks and is growing to love, which is access to learning. And Bethia, in fact, has more learning than most young women. Maybe this part is a little Mary Sue-ish, perhaps, where she knows all sorts of languages from witnessing her father teaching her brother and the Indian students, and then she also knows the Wampanoag language, and also, like Anna Frith, she knows a lot about midwifery without having actually studied it. It's another subplot that comes up that was kind of amusing reading this one second. But I do think the end of her story makes a lot more sense than Anna's did. It is told in a similar way, where she is writing diary entries after the fact. Well, the story is told in 3 parts, and so we don't get too ahead of the action in any of the parts, but she is always looking back on what's happened in her life, and she is not a good biographer of Caleb and his experience, but his relationship to her is something that really is a backbone of this novel. That Caleb was kind of like the brother that she never had. She didn't have a great relationship with her brother, and he challenged her spiritually from before he was a Christian to after he was a Christian. He was always someone stalwart in her corner, although he was never, subsidized in becoming a supporting member of her story as well. I think that Bethia lives a rather rich and fascinating life for such a narrow life, and the decision she has to come to as a woman about the path she's going to take and what she's going to strive for, it all feels relatively nuanced, where again the answers aren't always easy, and at the very end, or at least when she looks back at the end of Caleb's life, she might even come close to the idea of multicultural understanding. So yeah, I thought this was a really rich novel in terms of character growth and character relationships and the intricacies of setting as well. So even though, it's a little bit of a misnomer to say it's directly about Caleb, there's a lot of interesting stuff in here. So that about covers it for me now. I will leave links to all of my reviews of the Geraldine Brooks books I've read listed down below. I also got to see her talk in person at the National Book Festival a couple of years ago when she was promoting Horse, so I can link that video down below as well. And finally, Matthew Sharapa, a fellow booktuber, did his own Geraldine Brooks backlist reading video a while back, so I'll link that if you want to hear his thoughts on her books. I do think People of the Book is my favorite of her books, but I'll admit to some bias because she is dramatizing Jewish history, which is a particular interest of mine. And I'll be back on this channel imminently for the last of my AM reading videos in January. We are now almost at the end of the first month of 2024, so stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.